I'm Melisa Nielsen, and welcome to 2023.
Parenting and homeschooling can feel like a large feat to take on. Melisa Nielsen is here sharing her 26 years experience to help us. Melisa will inspire you with foundations for early childhood, Waldorf curriculum by the grade, middle school and high school resources, planning for peace, form drawing, beeswax modeling, wet-on-wet painting, inner work, temperaments, music, handwork, festivals, eurythmy, circle time, creating a co-op, homeschooling multiple children, conscious parenting, special needs, peaceful bedtime, and much more.
We're going to be doing our podcast in a two-piece format. So the first piece will be here on YouTube or on the podcast platform where you can listen to it for free. And the second piece, which is a deeper piece, a little more like going behind the scenes with Melisa a little bit. How do I actually apply these things in my life? And sometimes some juicier content. That is going to be available on our Patreon. Welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining me today. I am super excited to have Miss Tiffany back with us. And today we're going to talk about class 1/grade 1. We call it different things in different countries, right? And we're going to talk about sort of first grade readiness. And then also for our Patreon piece, we're going to go deep dive into some fairy tales and the importance of fairy tales and how we can stop being afraid of them. So first, I'm going to introduce Miss Tiffany. If you were with us for early childhood, you know a little bit about her, but I'm going to let her talk again about herself and sort of tell us where she's been and in where she is in her journey. Thank you, Miss Tiffany, for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to talk about grade 1. And man, has it been a journey for me with Waldorf education to be teaching grade 1 and to be supporting the parents of grade 1. So for those that might have heard before, I started my lifetime journey with Waldorf education right after my oldest son, who's turning 12 soon, was born. And I found Melisa and I found the Thinking, Feeling, Willing program. And it inspired me so much in my work as a parent to change my career path. And I became a Waldorf teacher through the course of many years. And I worked in Waldorf public schools, Waldorf private schools, parent-child program, homeschooling mom of 4 kids, and seasons of 7 teacher for grade 1. So it's been a journey.
It has been such a journey. I was thinking about how long we've known each other, and it's just so odd. Not odd, but fun that you've got an almost 12-year-old, I've got an almost 12-year-old. So that means we met right around that time. And it's just been truly a pleasure to have you on our team at Seasons of 7. I know how much the parents love you, and I'm really excited to dive into some of these topics today because they're things that people often hear from me, but it's great for them to hear them from other people. And so let's go ahead and dive in. Let's dive into the space of like, who is ready for class 1 and what is sort of going on with that child? So in the early childhood portion for our Patreon patrons, my goodness, that's a tongue twister. We talked about sort of the 3-year and 6-year changes. And so we've kind of butted up to the space of first grade. So what is that? What is going on with that 6 going on 7-year-old and who then is ready? Like in your experience, who is ready for class 1?
So Steiner writes it as a child who's experienced 7 springs or 7 Easters. And what that means is the child is essentially a full 6.5 or close to it, or closer to 7,
right.
When they begin first grade. I had a child go right in right after he turned 7. And then my girls have been, that 6.5 space. So that's what is the general rule, is that they are close to 6.5, 7 as they begin. But, what do we look for as Waldorf educators? Well, there's kind of 3 things that we look for. Most, first graders going into a public school system is just, here they are, they could be 6 and they're just going in.
Right.
We really intentionally look at social, at physical and cognitive abilities when we're talking about a student going into class 1. There's observations we do on, reaching your hand over your head. And it's just something as simple as that, to just see body proportions. Have they lost some teeth? Are they getting 6-year molars? And it's not, are they ready for class 1 necessarily? It's, how do we meet the child that's now here in the space of being 6.5, 7? And how do we maybe not be in that space if they're younger and they're doing academics? To really not go into that space, I think, is a question too. Because we're giving them such a gift to just be a child until then. And then I can't tell you how many times I've experienced this, both with my own children and working with parents. They're hungry. They're ready for it. They are so hungry.
In a much different way than that 5-year-old. You think that 5-year-old is ready for it. You think, oh no, they're ready. I'm robbing them from being able to learn to read. There's a much different hunger that comes when they're really ready. And you kind of can't know it until you've walked it. Right? Yes. I think too, you said something interesting, because I find that often parents will say to me, oh, but they've lost 3 teeth. But it isn't the loss of teeth as much as it is the emergence of new teeth.
Yeah, the 6-year molars, most parents, I didn't, as the first time I went to the dentist and they were like, oh, he's got his 6-year molars. Do you want to put, something on them? Because they're his first adult teeth. And I'm like, what? He grew more teeth? And then,
we don't even think about it.
Yeah, going through my second, who's like super sensitive to everything. Like, I knew when those were coming, and he told me. And it's not so much the loss of teeth. Our kids are losing them younger and younger for environmental reasons, for brain development reasons. Everything's happening earlier.
Food stuff, all the things.
But their 6-year molars really don't come in until 6, 6.5, sometimes 7. And like, think about a child. This goes back to, we'll talk about 6-year change in first grade readiness, but all of their physical body has kind of been formed in early childhood, but now we're in the head. And actually physically, we're in the head. They're losing teeth. They're getting these 6-year molars. They've got 2 sets of teeth in their head.
They've lost that baby pudginess that they've had.
Yeah. And they're like very much in a head space of being ready to receive that too. Through their education.
Right. No, so much so. What would you say to the parent that is, they've got a 5-year-old that they think that they're in the hungry space. They think that they're there.
Yeah.
What would you say to that parent?
I had many conversations around this. And I would say really, truly understand what a gift it is for a child to just be a child. What a beautiful,
so much so, Tiffany, so much.
What a beautiful gift. Even for that 6.5 turning 7-year-old right before first grade, I experienced it. He was a summer birthday. I could have gone either way.
Right. Same.
Give them that gift of really developing that social capacity, their physical body. So much of their physical body, and I'm sure we'll talk about it, relates to their academic work. If we give them the time and space to do what their early childhood body should do as that 5-year-old, we're actually giving them the basis of academics without drilling in numbers and letters. We're letting them develop that. And then they're not living in this imagery of like, basic early readers or things like that. They're still living in the stories and the puppets. And, we're still meeting them on a different level. We don't have to rush. Right. And if you look at Waldorf education as a whole, the time will come for everything. Trust the process.
There's nothing missing. There's nothing missing from Waldorf education. You just have to walk it.
Yes. And I didn't understand that until I understood it, right?
Right. I do think there's that piece where you kind of, if you are listening to us and you're like, I don't know, ladies, you either have to decide to trust us and have faith in the child that's in front of you, or not. And it's okay. If you're not, it's totally okay. You'll learn in another way. I mean, I've been parent coaching for, nearly 20 years. Not one time, not once have I had a parent come back to me and say, man, I'm really sorry that I waited. I'm so mad that you talked me into waiting. Usually what I have is parents coming back to me saying, I wish I had waited.
Yeah.
I wish I
Yeah.
had listened to you. I wish here I am doing second grade again because I wish I had listened to you, and I realize we're not ready for the third grade content.
Yep.
I think it's important to understand as we start the Waldorf journey is that the story content for every year, at least through eighth, it's matches where the child is.
Yeah.
It matches it so beautifully. So you don't want to put a 6-year-old in third grade. They won't understand the stories. They will meet them so much differently. I remember, so my my oldest has autism, and sometimes kids with autism spectrum stuff, they pick things up a little bit differently. So he was 6.5 when he started grade 1, and then 7.5 with grade 2, that kind of thing. And I remember I was telling a story to my then younger child that I had already told my oldest. And from the other room, he's like laughing his bum off. Like, what are you laughing at? I've stopped the story. He goes, I finally get it. Like he had heard the story again 2 years later, but he was not quite, because sometimes our kids on the spectrum are not quite there yet. He's like, I finally get it. I remember you telling me that story and I just didn't get it, but now I get it. And so, it was funny to sort of watch that. And as the parent go, oh yeah, it really is so important that those stories hit them when they should. So I think if we're teaching, and it doesn't matter if it's first grade or eighth grade, and you're like, what happened? Did my hair go flat? Like why are they not connecting? It's important to step back and say, wait, are they ready for this content?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I 100% agree.
No, sorry, that kind of went on a tangent there, but I just am like thinking how important it is for us to really match the content with the child.
Yeah.
So much so. Speaking of content, what is the general content of first grade? I mean, often people are like, all right, finally we're going to teach our kids to read, but that's not actually the purpose of first grade.
Right. No, it's not. And in fact, many of the first graders aren't going to leave with, a full reading by the end of the first grade year. Sometimes even second grade, potentially you're following your child. But what we are providing in grade 1 is the foundation of academics. So just like we did in early childhood, the foundation of life, we're now giving them the foundation of academics. We're giving them all the numbers. We're giving them all the letters. We're beginning to bring in nature, not like here's your science, but bringing in nature and giving them that type of thing. And to be done in beautiful imagery, to see the M coming from the mountain, to see, the vowel angel of A extending your arms up into the ah that we say, like we're bringing this academic piece through the beauty, which is the second part of 7 to 14, the world is beautiful, and still meeting the child, right? And so that's what we're giving them. We're giving them the letters, the numbers, they're going to start reading their sentences and their handwriting. That's another thing, handwriting. To be able to give them the gift of proper handwriting from the beginning and not have to go back and correct what they might have learned earlier. We start heaven down to earth and we go this direction, and we're giving, how beautiful is their handwriting going to be?
I agree.
And a big departure from early childhood, and I, work with this on a daily basis, is they're following me, their teacher. Or if you're homeschooling, they're following you with building a beautiful image from a story. And we're giving them the foundation of all of what is our will being put down into our work, right?
I love that imagery. The will into work. So beautiful.
Yeah.
So beautiful.
So the foundations of all things academic, right?
It totally is. And I think too, if there's anything parents underestimate when they're homeschooling, it is the space that they have to realize now your child is supposed to follow you. I mean, yes, you're their parent, they're always going to follow you. But when it comes to school, you've got to know your stuff. If you're being wishy-washy and you're not prepared, guess what? They won't follow you. Especially if you are trying to parent a choleric child. They'll be like, sorry, I don't trust you. I don't trust you.
Yeah.
And that's that space of them really really wanting to follow you. So they're still like little stalkers, right? Excuse me. They're still following us in that way and imitating us, but it's in a much different way. They're not imitating as much, of course, in the space, but they need to know that we know our stuff.
Yeah. And we need to. Yeah.
Excuse me. What about the fairy tale content for first grade? We're going to just dip into it this much, and then we're going to talk about it more in our Patreon section. But let's talk briefly about this fairy tale space, and then also like what nature stories, because Steiner talked about this home surroundings piece and this like natural space. He's not talking about like let's go out and do science, but what happens is we're like doing science.
Yeah, through beautiful stories, right? So yes, fairy tales for the first grader are actual fairy tales, right? Many people use Grimm's fairy tales, but it's not only Grimm's.
Right.
I
Many different
parents, I challenge myself in my curriculum writing to bring other fairy tales. But what kind of fairy tales? Because we've talked about that with early childhood.
Right.
We don't want to give them too much, sad imagery or things like that, because they're just not quite there yet. Right. But now we have a child who we just talked about is losing teeth. They're departing from early childhood. They're not in this beautiful space that we're giving them. They're out kind of like eyes open to the world. And so we need to give them stories that are meeting them in that development. So stories that tell them they're starting a journey, and they are starting a journey. They are on the beginning of their journey. Tales that personally characters are, having sorrow or a challenge. And if we're giving that journey to the child, then they're going to know how to meet a challenge. They're going to know how to meet something hard, an obstacle, a character that's not good, right?
Right. It helps them with that discernment space that they're just kind of coming into, like understanding, wait, why do I not feel good right now? And I think so often, and we'll talk more about this in the other segment, but there's so often parents stop the story because the child is like, oh, I get a bellyache now, or my tummy hurts from that. They have to see the resolve, because that's what the part of this is, a goodness space, right? So how do you tackle that? How do you talk to parents about that when they have a story like that they're trying to tackle?
Yeah. Well, it is important for them to hear the resolution, right? The ending, like what's happened, what came of the journey that they went on. But for parents, I think it really dives down to, why are they feeling that way? Why are they feeling that around the story themselves? Instead of, like you said, leading matter-of-factly, here's the story. Because our adultness is a much different hat to wear than our 6 and 7-year-old is wearing. And that's where we are going to do our inner work around homeschooling, around the curriculum, about the stories, and be like, okay, this is why I'm doing this. This is why I'm bringing this story. And don't pick a story then if it makes you feel super weird. That's not what we're saying to do. Right. There's plenty of stories. Don't pick that one.
Right. There's so many stories. Don't freak out just because you can't tell one story that's been recommended that is fine for one person, but won't be fine for you.
Right.
Find something else with the same archetypes that you're trying to teach. Right. I do love too that there's this space that there really are fairy tales in every culture. And so challenging yourself to find, if you don't love Brothers Grimm, guess what? You're gonna find that as you pull in other cultures, you're like, wait a minute, this sounds like Sleeping Beauty.
Yeah, exactly.
It sounds like the Princess and the Frog, that kind of thing.
That's, we do that in our family. My husband's family is Armenian, and it was important for me to like bring in some of that. There's plenty of Armenian fairy tales similar yet, that have the underlying themes of Cinderella or whatnot, but that are bringing his culture to our children. And we do that with local or our heritage, our culture. We want to bring those stories. It's not, here's Brothers Grimm, read all of them. That's not what it's about. It's bringing fairy tales that are allowing them to come from this dream world of early childhood to give them really imaginative, beautiful imagery of the 7-year-old. right?
No, I love that.
That's what we're doing.
I love that. I also want, let's tackle this one little piece before we head to the other place. Often parents will say to me, they are so long, I cannot memorize them. But we definitely are still giving stories from our mouth as much as possible, right? So I've given my tips in the past of like what I do to help memorize a story. Is there anything, because you're memorizing them for your first grade class, and what do you do when you've got a really long fairy tale? How many times do you tell it to yourself? What are you doing to memorize it?
So I definitely try, over the summer before to kind of read through all the stories I'm going to bring, right? So that's as a homeschooling parent or as a teacher, you're going to kind of choose the curriculum that you're going to bring so that it's not like, hey, we're opening it up and reading, and for the first time we're like, oh, actually I don't want to bring
Moms
this.
are doing that. I'm trying to get them to stop it.
Yes. So that's the first part. So we're reading through it at least once to get the idea. But as I'm preparing one for, let's say, the next block or whatnot, I'm reading it multiple times. I tend to have a really good, where I'm reading, I can kind of retain the image. But a big thing that helps me are what are the key points to the story. They first meet this character and then they do this. Then they go here. And it's just like those little tiny, just like, I'm going to say it, us moms that are like, oh, you turn right at that gas station, then by the library.
Right.
That's how we get somewhere.
The signpost. Yes.
In the story too.
No, that's absolutely perfect. That is so perfect. I always talk about like keeping notes, use a Post-it, tuck it under your leg. But these are the things you would write on that Post-it. You would write those directions. You would write those little bits down, because then if you're really having a hard time, because I know some moms really have a hard time memorizing, those are the pieces you're writing down. I also used to tell them to my husband the night before.
That's a good idea. Yeah, I love that.
Every year we have 5 children. So every time we have a first grader, I'd be like, all right, you got to listen to the story tonight. And so he'd be like, all right, what's the story?
Yeah.
But it's a good way to, because then too, in your retelling it feels different than just having it in your head. Yeah. But I love that. I love that imagery of like, what's next? Because I actually, that's something I hadn't articulated before, like really being able to go, well, what happens next in the story? Because too, if you're taking that like a mental journey as the parent of the main character from the beginning to the end, and you at least know where they ended up, then it helps you to sort of find those pieces or how they got there.
I tell parents, too, don't feel like they have to memorize it word for word. That's not what it's about. No. What is the journey? Like, yeah, you messed up on that part. Okay, go back and say, well, actually, that's what it's about. What is the feeling of the story? What is the imagery? Who are the characters and the archetypical images? That's what you're doing. No, that is so important, because it is not about it being word for word. I will say when I find a story that I do love the way it's told, that's the time that I'll bring the book out. Yes. And because otherwise it's not my story, right? But in other times when we're bringing these stories to our children, it needs to be Hansel and Gretel retold by Miss Tiffany, not by Brothers Grimm, right? It's a retelling then, and so that we have to sort of like give ourselves a break and all of that. Okay, so we're going to close up this part, and if you want to go deeper with us, we're going to take a little deep dive on fairy tales. It's available over at our Patreon. We're going to talk about some juicy pieces and how we can sort of get over ourselves sometimes when it comes to these fairy tales. So join us over there, and we'll see you in the next podcast. Find our Patreon at Ariel's Light. So Ariel's Light, if you haven't heard already, is the ministry that we started this year. Interfaith, so we welcome people of all faiths to come and experience and converse and really get to know this conscious parenting space. I see it as a space for people that might be deeply into their religion, like being able to go deeper in what that parent-child relationship means. And then people that are just trying to figure out, like, what does this inner work journey mean to me? You're in that space, and I've been there. You're trying to figure out, well, how do I bring what's welling up inside me to my children so that they aren't lost in confusion, so that they actually have this piece of goodness and beauty that Steiner always talks about. So the ministry has roots of anthroposophy, and we will be talking about things from an anthroposophical standpoint, but also really bringing you good content that
that you can bring into your life